And to me, a life well lived is probably, more important in what we really want to discover. But that's not what society really teaches us to do. Society and school is really kind of putting us on that track, which is the survival living well piece, you know. But a life well lived is really not taught in school. So I feel like it's something that each individual has to explore, especially when things don't feel right in life. You're doing the living well track. You're studying hard. You're going to the school that you're supposed to go to. You're getting the job that you're supposed to get, but something feels off. And in that process of something feeling off, I think that's when we begin to explore, am I living, is this the life? Isn't this is I'm doing everything right, but why doesn't it feel well? Doesn't it really necessarily feel good? And that's when you start to explore, I think, what does it mean to have a life well lived?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Today we'll be speaking with Etch Haring. Etch is a functional medicine health coach and entrepreneur. She is also a personal development advisor with extensive experience partnering with individuals and innovative community leaders to help them discover and manifest their core intentions and authentic purpose. Using transformation-driven strategies, she works with organizations to create inspirational products and services that encourage personal growth in individuals and their communities. Hey, Etch, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Hi, Broderick. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here and have this conversation about the good life. I think it's such an important conversation to have always, and but in particularly right now with all of the various events happening in the world, it's always important to give some attention to what it means to live well, to do good, to be good, to explore this subject is of value, I think, at least. So tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you, Etch?
Oh, that's a big question. I'm just a person trying to figure out what this life matrix is all about, Let's see. I grew up in two countries, Japan and the U.S., so that kind of gave me a slightly different perspective on life. I'm coming from having a design background and then working in marketing. And what I loved about working in marketing was it was all about, I hate to say manipulating, but really understanding how people behave and what drives them to behave the way they do, and using sort of emotional impact or appeal to emotion to get people to be drawn to product. And that always fascinated me. And while it can be used to sell product, it can be used for many better intentions as well. So I transitioned then to functional medicine health coaching, where I thought I could take what I've learned about marketing, but perhaps apply it to living well, and what are the ways that emotions affect the way we behave, and those behaviors dictate whether we live a healthy life or unhealthy life. So that's where I've landed in sort of this space over the years.
Well, that's great. So I can go ahead and ask you already. What is this living well? What does it mean to live well to you?
Okay, so I'm going to distinguish between living well. To me, has a lot of social definition to it. Study hard, make lots of money, go to good school, make money, get married, buy the house in the suburb, have kids, work really hard till you're 65, retire, and then sit on the beach or play golf and tennis. That's kind of the good life, living well. Society kind of tells us that. But then I think it's also different from a life well lived. And to me, a life well lived is probably, more important in what we really want to discover. But that's not what society really teaches us to do. society and school is really kind of putting us on that track, which is the survival living well piece, you know. But a life well lived is really not taught in school. So I feel like it's something that each individual has to explore, especially when things don't feel right in life. You're doing the living well track. You're studying hard. You're going to the school that you're supposed to go to. You're getting the job that you're supposed to get, but something feels off. And in that process of something feeling off, I think that's when we begin to explore, am I living? Is this the life? Isn't this is I'm doing everything right, but why doesn't it feel well? Doesn't it really necessarily feel good? And that's when you start to explore, I think, what does it mean to have a life well lived? So I'm going to kind of leave it there for now.
Yeah, so a life well lived. So
Yeah.
let's unpack that. I think I like how you term that or phrase that rather. That's the ancient Greeks used to talk about that idea
Yeah.
of living a virtuous life, a eudaimonia, the life
Yes.
well lived. So can
Yes.
you unpack that a little bit more? What does that mean, a life well lived? If it's not those things that society is encouraging us to do,
Mm-hmm.
what is it then?
Well, the so the ancient Greeks who sort of pondered this and figured this out, their survival needs were probably met. But for 99% of the rest of the population, their survival needs weren't met, and so most people were just trying to get to. I think the past 2,000 or 3,000 years, humanity's been trying to get to that living well standard, right? And we're kind of currently living in that space where we've gotten to the living well, but few of us are sitting around and pondering, what is a life well lived? And what they found out was, and I think that this is the thing, living well tends to be focused on our external needs, a house, a roof over our head, plenty of food, fun activities. Whereas a life well lived in eudaimonia is more focused on the internal factor, internal values, internal states of being. What you might also, Maslow might have called self actualization. So a life well lived seems to be one where those internal uh, true internal needs are addressed, satisfied, and being worked on as you're going through, the basic everyday thing of being a human, eating, sleeping, drinking, all of those things that we do just to have a body here on this earth. Um, so, so if we can get to that space where we can think about the true sort of virtues and happiness, that eudaimonia piece, I think it's that internal reflection. Some people call it spiritual, some people call it consciousness, but living from that space. So, in other words, instead of being a material being, occasionally having a spiritual experience, you kind of switch over to being fundamentally a conscious spiritual being, having a material experience.
Mm.
That's kind of a easy, simple summary, but
No, that sounds great. We'll continue to unpack that.
for sure.
Yeah. What forever, right? Beyond
Yeah,
this
yeah.
this conversation for sure.
Exactly.
I guess that's the purpose of this whole podcast, is to
Yeah,
keep this dialogue, this conversation
that's
going.
right. That's
So
right.
so how did you get interested in these things? You mentioned the ancient Greeks and Greek philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
but other than that, you can elaborate on that more as well. But
Mm-hmm.
what drew you to reflecting on these types of questions and
Mm-hmm.
pursuing this type of pursuing what's the word I'm looking for? Doing work in
Mm-hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
with the pursuit of
Yeah.
enhancing well-being.
The funny thing is, and my theory is that, we try to escape human suffering. We want to be, alleviate ourselves from human suffering. But suffering is the way, the entry point to sort of these openings to exploring these topics, right? So I think this is going to sound maybe ridiculous, but when I was a teenager and I was in the United States, I was in the Midwest and, Asian in an entirely a sea of white kids, right? And it was, I just kind of noticed, I mean, there were prejudices, I experienced prejudices and so on. Um, but there is teenage angst, as it is, there's teenage angst going on. But on top of that, when you add another layer of being from a different culture, having parents that, don't understand the culture and what's normal, in terms of going to football games, and you can't do that, go to a dance, can't do that. So there was just all this internal, I think, struggle that was going on with my own personal identity. And around that time, I was 16, 17 years old, I read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, and then I read Narcissus and Goldman, and I started going down this path of, oh my gosh, there's a way to look at life that is beyond this, you know, uh, good life thing of, going to parties, going to the football game, So maybe it was teenage angst, but that kind of threw me into this exploration of, oh gosh, what is it? What is identity? What is it to me? What does it mean to be happy? And what's the purpose and meaning of life? These big questions are kind of coming to me. So I would say I'm going to attribute it to teenage angst. That was my port of entry.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. I think that challenges in life, suffering.
Yeah.
Sometimes when we use the word suffering, folks may think that it's, you have to have something really traumatic, and that equates
Mm-hmm.
suffering. Well, no, suffering can be this dissatisfaction
Yeah.
or emotional dissatisfaction, psychological dissatisfaction. When things are
Totally.
not going your way, that's a type of suffering,
Yeah.
and it just gnaws at you.
Right.
And
Exactly. And I
um,
think that's what negative or survival emotions, and I
mhm,
call them survival emotions because I think they're there to message something to us, um, and the body is programmed pretty brilliantly, to tell us
mhm,
something's not right, and it assists the whole internal process to kind of know that you need to make some adjustments here, or you need to. This is your check engine light,
mhm,
go go look under the hood. That's what it is,
exactly.
those
Yeah.
hurtful emotions or difficult emotions that you actually feel in your body are an indicator that's saying, it's time to look under the hood and see what's going on inside.
Yeah, exactly. And emotions encourage us to act.
Yes.
Those feelings, whatever we may not necessarily always comprehend them, but it compels us to do something, to act.
Right.
And being
Exactly.
and doing what you did, reflecting, being self-reflective, studying, reading. Herman Hesse is
Yes.
such a place, such a significant figure in so many people's lives. Siddhartha in
Mm-hmm.
particular.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so how does these challenges, how
Mm-hmm.
do they inspire us or encourage us to act, to do something about our current condition?
Um, so it's interesting. I don't think a lot of people know how to do it. That's why we have so much. I mean, alcoholism, drug addiction, depression, anxiety. I mean, that's part of what we're trying to do, address, my sister and I, with this kind of company that we created. But society and school doesn't really help us address those issues, other than to medicate or to numb out or to distract, to kind of push them aside, right? Um, I mean, even Netflix is a great way to distract yourself from feeling
Mm-hmm.
bad. Um, so we know of ways to sort of set it aside, push it aside, but we don't really have the methodology to go in and face it. Uh, unless you've kind of gleaned through some wisdom, or somebody influences your life and taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, what about self-exploration? What about self-awareness? Maybe it's a therapist. I mean, I think a lot of people pay a therapist to go and have them tell you it's time to explore yourself. Let's find inner awareness. But school's not educating you to that, right? I mean, you could be the most successful person. And it was interesting. I was listening to a podcast or an interview of Stephen Bartlett. And, he was this guy, he's Black, grew up in England. And by 30, he had amassed this wealth. His company went public. And inside, I wasn't happy. Inside I was kind of feeling empty. And at that moment, I realized, here he was living well. He was doing the ideal dream, living well. But why did he feel empty inside? He didn't feel fulfillment. He didn't feel that happiness that he was chasing after, right? And so basically, society tells us living well is accomplishing all these material milestones. But we're not educated to finding your true self, creating self-awareness, finding eudaimonia. Society doesn't do it. I think once upon a time, religion did that. Religion was a source of teaching us some of these values, but morals, guidance to the internal, but they became institutionalized. They were lost. And so today, I think finding that guidance is really difficult. And maybe that's why partially people are turning to meditation and contemplative practice, because we're realizing, we got to address this. Otherwise, we're all heading towards burnout, right?
Mm-hmm.
Societally speaking, we're going towards burnout. And then the Surgeon General is telling us that isolation is our biggest, our next epidemic right now, right? So, what is that? Why is that happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's probably because we've been trying to live well, and in the process of living, attempting to live well and catch up to that whole material standard, we're all hitting burnout, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a particular version of living well.
Right.
And I think that it's
Exactly.
missing something. It's missing all these other factors.
Right.
It's,
Right.
you brought up quite a few things there that kind of points to this. Our emphasis on materialism,
Mm-hmm.
and our focus on, or I would say our reduction of ourselves to simply matter. The
Mm-hmm.
matter of us, the body, is primary, and our consciousness and the subsequent feelings, thoughts, emotions are epiphenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
They come out of matter
Right.
magically. And we
Right.
just completely accept that. And
Right.
so to live good is what we
Mm-hmm.
can see materially.
Right.
How much do you have? Our Even though the what's the word I'm looking for? The social construct
Mm-hmm.
that we've created is a set of ideas, but we value ideas, but we don't really value the exploration of those ideas
Mm-hmm.
in and of themselves,
Right.
and how they relate to the story that we hold or we carry about what it means to actually live well.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we're living well. You got all your food, your basic needs met,
Yeah.
and then you have a lot of extra to play, which is great. That's a
Mm-hmm.
part of it.
Yeah.
And there's this other aspect that we do not give attention to. You mentioned education. Do we? I have what I went through undergrad, graduate school, got a PhD, and I never took a philosophy course.
Mm-hmm.
I was never challenged to think about what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a scientist. Why didn't I take at least a course in the philosophy of science, ideas, the exploration of ideas? What is the story behind science? But yet I have a doctorate of philosophy. And I value that education. I value
Yeah.
that emphasis on, you know, materially or physically learning about the universe and figuring out how to make the world better
Yeah.
mechanically, physically. That's really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was so much negated,
Mm-hmm.
and such that we have what we see in the world today: highly successful people, scientists with lots of bad ideas and not well thought out ideas, because I just don't think we've been trained to think
Mm-hmm.
about the narrative that we're actually carrying.
Yeah.
And so that narrative is going to influence how we view what is good.
Mm-hmm.
What is good? How do we
Yeah.
use this science and this technology? What
Right.
are we doing it for?
Right. What's the
Um,
purpose of it?
what's the purpose of it? Oh,
Yeah.
we want to make human life better. In terms of what?
Yeah.
We want to extend human life. Okay, great. But what about the quality? What is that
Right.
qualitative aspect?
And why? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I find it totally ironic that the father of quantum mechanics, quantum physics, Max Planck, said all material is derived from consciousness. And yet
Hmm.
currently, a lot of modern science is telling us the opposite, right? That it's the physical world that projects or emanates, consciousness or any thoughts or emotions, right?
Hmm.
But I think there are enough physicists that probably might be stating that it might be the other way around,
Yeah.
you know.
But they're afraid to say it because of the paradigm that we're living in. And it's hard
Mm-hmm.
to kind of buck that. That's changing. That's
Yeah.
changing. And I think people are starting to see the absurdity of it.
Yeah.
But it touches on something else that you brought up. How did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
And you brought up religion.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, in the Western Enlightenment, the scientific Enlightenment turned to scientific materialism and said that a lot of, and I get it, you know, 15th, 14th century Europe, you know, uh,
There's a
I
lot of
don't want,
superstition,
yeah,
you know.
I want to be careful with my
Right.
words here because I'm
Right.
not an anti-religious person per
Right.
se,
Right. Right.
but there are certain superstitions and very childlike perspectives on religion that was dominating the culture.
Right.
And that scientific revolution was very important to kind of
Yeah.
push that stuff aside,
Yeah.
but kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and not giving enough, not valuing, devaluing these other aspects that are metaphors for how to live.
Yeah.
And just because certain metaphors are antiquated or, well, more fantasy like,
Yeah.
or even childlike today, the way we look at some of those, that doesn't mean that there isn't any value in there.
Right.
And to
Right.
totally disregard it and put it to the side, this is the kind of stuff that you're going to get in a society.
Yeah. Well, that's where I love. Karen Armstrong wrote a book, on compassion, and she basically said that if you look at the world's religions, she was a former nun who left the church, became a reporter, and then author, and started this sort of compassion movement. But I think she studied at Oxford. But she said basically that at the core of all the world's religions is this notion of compassion, and there's a teaching of basically spirituality. But over the years, institutions come in, power play comes in. When you think about it, the Christians were, suddenly one day Constantine, is looking at this going, hey, if you can get the Christians to go to the lion's den for you, that's pretty powerful psychology. So he becomes a Christian, right? And he goes, that's how I want to roll. But so there's a power to that which has been harnessed over the centuries by kings and various power players. Um, but remember, the masses were uneducated, right? They were taking
Mm-hmm.
their cues from these people who knew what they were doing better than they did. And so times have changed, right? We're more educated now. And I really, my fundamental belief is that science and religion are actually looking at the same universe and the same world,
Mm-hmm.
but they're coming at it from different uh, locus points. But so science without spirituality is misguided, and then spirituality without science can become superstitious. So I think the two of them actually are looking at one reality. And I think when I look at like quantum physics or physics as it is today, post Newtonian physics, some of it just sounds really mystical to me, you know?
Woo woo.
Yeah, it does. I mean, some of this stuff out there, I'm going, whoa, that's really mind blowing, that, some scientists are saying we're a projected holograph from a black hole. This is all an illusion. And I'm going, hey, that the Hindus have been saying that for, millennia. So um, I think there are actually two sides of, viewing this one reality. So meditation has been just a normal thing, an accepted normal practice in various, centuries old, millennia old religious traditions, right? But meditation was only until, very recently looked at as some practice that these monks do, whatever. So the Dalai Lama goes and gets his brain scanned at Stanford, and suddenly it's like, oh, meditation. This stuff is good, And so now Palo Alto, everybody's meditating. So, I mean,
Yeah.
so I really think that we live in an interesting time where maybe this is the time that science and spirituality can, kind of come to see the balance of each other,
Yeah.
and receive inspiration from one another. So that's kind
Yeah.
of where I think historically we might be right now.
Yeah. And taking an integrated perspective, a holistic perspective on
Yes.
reality itself, and to reduce reality to physical things,
Mm-hmm.
and not understanding that is a philosophical assumption that one is making.
Right.
It can be problematic, as we're seeing.
Yeah.
And it's hard to tell the story of living a good life or living well if you are reducing everything to material matter.
All we
Uh,
have to do is ask ourselves today, how
yeah,
are we doing?
exactly.
How are we doing? Let's just take a look around. How are we
Hmm.
doing? Well,
Exactly.
the statistics are saying we're kind of not doing so great right now
Yeah, it's
today.
interesting, I'm not feeling well, for instance. Let's go look in your brain. Let's see what kind of
Yeah.
what's your biochemical makeup and what neurons are firing in your brain. I'm like, just have a conversation with the person,
Right.
about how they feel. No,
Right.
that's not real. That's an epiphenomenal. We need to look at the brain and we need to figure out what kind of chemical imbalance that is taking place, which
Mm-hmm.
has been debunked, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that
Yeah.
it's psychological, mental health is primarily
Chemical.
a reflection of chemical imbalance, which is
Mm-hmm.
no, again, woo woo. And I
Yeah.
think people are acknowledging those things that are really strange.
Oh,
That
yeah.
one can the thing that we know most prior to brain scans, prior to all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
is that we have consciousness, and that there is a subject here. There's something in us that is aware.
Mm-hmm.
We do know that there are various psychological phenomena. We have a story that is unfolding in our minds. We're not even aware of that narrative because a lot of it is subconscious,
Yeah.
beneath the surface of our awareness.
Yeah.
And we have this capacity through things like meditative practices, contemplative practices, to reflect, to watch, to
Mm-hmm.
observe the thoughts as they arise. And ultimately, we can observe and get to know the story that we're
Mm-hmm.
telling ourselves. That is of value in and of itself. I don't need to do a brain scan.
Right.
It's interesting, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I'm
Yeah.
not opposed to any of that,
Yeah.
but I think that there are different metaphors, different ways of talking about reality. So you can talk about it from a psychological perspective. You can talk about it from a spiritual
Mm-hmm.
perspective, a physical perspective, and then we can break those down. We can talk
Mm-hmm.
about life in terms of neurological neurons firing.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about you know the body, not just the body. We can talk about the human experience and just looking at evolution, just look at the
Right.
evolutionary arc.
Right.
That's
But I mean,
all
that's
great.
kind of all of those things, right? It's
It's
kind of
all of
in
it.
toto. It's all collectively happening, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we rethink about what it means to tell the story of humanity, to
Mm-hmm.
tell the story about the world that we're living in? Now,
Yeah.
within that story, that framework, what is the story of living well in that? What is the story of the good life
Mm-hmm.
from from that larger,
Yeah.
integrated or holistic perspective?
Yeah.
And yeah,
So to that point, do you know that Harvard study? It was an adult study where they said now it's 80 years they've been following a group of students who were at Harvard, and they followed them over lifespan, and it basically was to see where are the metrics that allow for a good life, a life of longevity, of happiness, success. And then, I mean, the summary of it was the most important thing in life to address and to value is relationship. It came down to relationships.
mm-hmm.
Okay. That means we're very social creatures, right? We're kind of programmed and wired to be in a social setting, to have social systems, right? So we went from tribal state to nation state. Now we're going from nation state to global state, right? So basically, how do we as a species live on planet Earth without killing the Earth, without killing ourselves, right? But it's all relational. if we don't recognize the relational nature of it, right, and we polarize, look at the world right now. We polarize within the United States or within, Israel. There was all this polarization. It's like an autoimmune disorder. You start attacking yourself, right?
That's right.
So that's not life inducing. So in some, scientifically, if you look at it, what is life inducing? What's life inducing? Well, gee, these spiritual teachings, compassion, care for one another, collaboration, these kind of are helpful in promoting the species, life and continuation. So
Mm-hmm.
why not incorporate them? It's very rational, you know. You can say it's ooh la la, excuse me, whatever it is. It's actually very rational. It makes
Exactly.
scientific sense. Unless annihilation is your idea, and entropy and annihilation is your theory.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think let's look at it in terms of, okay, what serves us well, is to live better in relationship. And interestingly, that relationship starts with yourself.
Yep.
Because if you hate yourself, you're self-annihilating. How do you relate to somebody else? How do you connect with another person in a healthy way, right? So
Mm-hmm.
first you want to have that self-compassion, a good relationship with yourself where you can say, hey, you're not bad. I mean, how often do we say, oh, stupid, you did it again? Or,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Mm-hmm.
you idiot, you did that,
All right.
So sometimes we're our own worst enemy, right? We are harshest on ourselves. So we kind of have to listen to how we speak to ourselves, how we treat ourselves. And then once we have, and then grow self-awareness. I mean, that's so key, but we don't educate to that, we don't have means to, say, okay, kids, we're going to have a self-awareness class here. It just doesn't
Right.
happen.
Isn't
Yeah.
that strange? Isn't it strange? Isn't it
Yeah.
strange?
Because,
Education. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah,
Go ahead.
no. Because, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, here's what's really has bugged me these last few years is, no, many years, but I read these books on meaning and purpose, right? Because to live well, you have to know you want to live your meaning and purpose. Okay, so we figured that out. I don't know how many people go, I can't figure out this purpose thing. Can you tell me what my purpose? I can't. Can you tell me how to figure out what my purpose is? You know, and people struggle with that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh well, meaning. Okay, what's the meaning? What's the most important meaning to me? What's my purpose? What is my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't know yourself, if you don't have self-awareness, you really can't figure out your purpose
Exactly.
because you can't figure out how you're going to best serve other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that self-awareness piece is so critical, but it's taken us forever to figure out how to get to that self-awareness. I mean, Maslow created that hierarchy of needs a long time ago. But
Mm-hmm.
have we been educating kids towards self-actualization? No.
Mm-hmm.
Do most of us even understand how to get to self-actualization? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if we're going to get to that eudaimonia, we're going to talk about that. I think we have to start talking about what do they mean and how do we explore that?
Exactly.
Self-awareness. How do we do it without necessarily having to pay a therapist, go to
Mm-hmm.
therapy for decades, right?
Yeah. Which is good,
Which
but
is good. Yeah, it's
yeah,
good.
because therapists help us clarify a narrative. It's
Yes,
all about narrative comprehension.
absolutely. But
I
you know
mean,
what? Most people can't afford a therapist, don't have the
yeah,
time to go to a therapist. And you can't even if you could, you can't book a therapist right now
yeah,
because they're all fully booked.
yeah. Therapists, coaches, whatever, teachers, and I think wow, you touched on so many things there. We're going to definitely come back to this relational piece because that's
Yeah.
how we got here. That's how we've
Right.
evolved as a
Right.
species. Is that our ancestors worked together collectively to create little tribes and communities so that they can survive
Yeah.
in a very dangerous
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
in terms of predator prey
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
Because individually by ourselves we can't do so much,
Yeah.
but collectively we're able to do quite a bit. And we even if
Right.
language is not even as language is relatively innate, um, uh, we still the stories, the way that we use language, the way that we engage our reason is a result of interacting with other human beings.
Hmm.
And that's such an important piece of the puzzle
Yeah.
in terms of living well, in terms of the larger narrative that we have about ourselves in the
Oh
world.
yeah.
And you mentioned, it starts with the individual. And so I'm going to say this: self-help is a good thing. And
Yeah.
I think that if you think about the ancient Greek philosophy, it's not just ancient Greeks, India, all that
Yes.
stuff. A lot
Yeah.
of it was self-help. You look at yoga
Mm-hmm.
philosophy, you look at Vedanta philosophy, in the various different traditions within the ancient Greek philosophy. It was all about self-help. And now self-help is a boogeyman word. But I'm like, no, self-help is great.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with self-help. Self-help shouldn't be
No.
relegated to, there's some out there stuff.
Yeah.
There's some stuff out there, you're like, that's a little crazy. There's some, very interesting
Yes.
storytellers in the wellness world that I don't resonate with.
Mm-hmm.
But if you dig deep into the world of science, there are some very interesting scientific ideas out there that I don't resonate well with either.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, like I said, re-owning, bringing
Yeah.
back this idea of self-help is good.
Yeah.
And self-help starts with what you just said: self-reflection,
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness. And the fact that in our educational system, we're not taught a basic thing, a basic, you can call it a practice,
Yeah.
a basic tool
Mm-hmm.
in education. Something is off. That's telling something about how we are being
Right.
educated as a
Right.
human being.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not taught self-reflection from the very beginning, or at least at some point in
Yeah.
our education,
Yeah.
something is bad off. That is very strange. If you just sit back and reflect on that, like, that is very, 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 very strange. What is
Yeah.
the purpose of my education then? Is
Right.
it for me to self-actualize? And I'm not speaking, I don't think you are either, speaking self-actualization in that it's all about me.
No.
Self-actualization for my own sake.
Yeah.
No, no, no. That's not
No.
what I'm
No. No. I know.
saying.
Yeah. Right.
You self-actualize, or you develop your potential so you can be of service to the whole.
Right.
You develop yourself so that you can share your gifts
Yes.
with the collective, because we are collective. There's no way around it. Every
Right.
choice
Right.
that I make has an influence on others, not just
Yeah.
other humans, but non-human animals,
Yeah.
all other species, all other life forms,
Totally.
non-life
Totally.
forms. Everything that we do has an impact.
Yes, the
Um,
interconnectedness is just beyond our comprehension. Absolutely, But to your point, why, and I love this quote. Thelonious Monk said, a genius is someone who is most like himself.
mhm,
Okay, that means he's true to himself, right? He knows his
mhm,
drives, he knows his motives, and he just lives true to that. He doesn't do what other people are telling him to do. So imagine if you're a heart cell. Heart cell says, I've been told to run, so I'm going to try to act like a muscle, or muscle cell says, no, I'm feeling like, I'm going to act like a liver muscle, I mean, I think that the idea is that within the body, we have cells that have a function, right? And all those functions contribute to the total functioning of the body. So we're kind of like the cells in this organism of humanity. And so if we can figure out, hey, what's my cell function? What is my function? And what am I best at contributing? Then maybe, we become a more efficient society, right? As opposed to everybody going into computer science, because that's the thing to do. Everybody can become a doctor or a lawyer because that was the thing to do in the 80s. I mean, so we need the collective, we need the artists, the musicians, we need all the different um, cells of the body to have these different functions, right? And some are
that's
very
right.
unique and some are just a few, but very critical to the function of the body. So I think that I love the analogy of humanity as one collective body. And the thing I was going to go back to was say, well, why didn't we just stay in the tribal state? Why aren't we still tribes today? Well,
Mhm,
one of the interesting things that happens in biology and what's happened with civilization is the more the cells become these collective complex masses, the more the capacity of that organism increases.
mhm,
So you can do a lot more with a greater complexity of an organism or a system, right? So today, if I want a chicken salad sandwich, I'm sorry, you're vegetarian. So if I want, a sandwich what's vegetarian? With an avocado on it. I don't have to grow my own avocado tree, harvest my own wheat, grind my wheat, and make that bread from scratch and go find an avocado, right? I can actually go and buy those items because we are specialized enough, right, to enjoy the fruits of this complexity, this complex organism, right? Our lives benefit so much from that complexity. So humanity right now, why not take advantage of that complexity? Instead of fighting, now I'm not going to get all those imports from China anymore. I mean, you know,
No, it's really.
I mean, just kidding. But, I think that our lives get richer when we can have food from different countries, cuisines of different countries, rather than the same old potatoes and meat, um, there's such a benefit and such an abundance of wealth that just comes from diversity and complexity. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why we're not in the tribal state anymore. We've evolved to this point probably because it worked better. It felt better. Something about it compelled us to come to this space, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, just
It's been a painful process, and some would argue, is
yes.
it better? I think that there are lots of things that are better about it, and that is inarguable. I don't think you can argue with that.
Yeah. Well, I know as a
You know,
woman, I don't want to go back 100
exactly.
years,
Even as a man, I definitely don't want to go back. And
Right.
I think that there are various things that I wouldn't want to go back to that place. Now, of course, there are people that's living on this planet right now that are living under horrendous conditions. So it
Right.
is a
Right.
painful process that
Yeah.
we're undergoing.
Yeah.
But I like your analogy. I preach this analogy. I shouldn't probably say preach, but I'm constantly using that analogy of we as a planetary organism, and
Mm-hmm.
each one of us as a humanity, not just humans, of course, but each one of us as a humanity has a responsibility in that.
Yeah.
And if we can again, work on developing ourselves, developing our potential.
Yeah.
Now, in a particular direction, we do
Mm-hmm.
have agency. And there's this argument about do
Yes.
we have free will and all that. That's a pointless discussion, I think, because we don't have 100% free will. And so any philosopher can, they got their tricks to just make an argument. But we do have the capacity to choose. We do have awareness. We have a capacity to place our attention somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so, since we can do that, then we know that there is some movement that's happening, that we are aging, the world is moving forward in some particular direction, but we get to choose what direction that is because where we turn our gaze.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that maybe we should focus on turning our gaze towards the good.
Oh yeah.
People are like, okay, well, what is that? Let's have that discussion.
Yeah.
That's what
Absolutely.
we need to
That's
have that
yes.
discussion and
Absolutely.
focus some attention on it.
Absolutely.
Maybe and
Absolutely.
let that drive us. And
Mm-hmm.
we need to have a debate about it. You and I are
Yeah.
going to have different ideas about it. And
Yeah.
from that, can we get a synthesis
Mm-hmm.
from that debate that you and I have
Yeah.
about it? Can I pick up something from you? You pick up something from me? And then we come to some agreement, even though we might have certain disagreements, but we
Yeah.
can come to say, okay, then as a collective,
Mm-hmm.
let's give some more attention to this. We can agree that this is a direction
Yeah.
that is worthy of going.
Yeah. Well, so this is interesting. I love this story of heaven and hell. Okay, so I want you to think of Earth. Okay, but so they said the story goes: heaven and hell look exactly the same. They look exactly the same. Okay, there's a huge banquet table, and there's this feast. This is abundant feast on the banquet table. Okay, so. But then you look at the people sitting around the banquet table in heaven, and they're all plump, and their cheeks are rosy, and they're well fed. They're enjoying this banquet table. And then you look at hell, and everybody's gaunt, and they're hungry, and they're starving. And well, what's the difference? Oh, the other thing is, both in heaven and in hell, everybody's hands are kind of stuck. They're tied behind their backs. Okay. So, but what happens is in heaven, they feed each other. They go, okay, I'm going to feed you, you feed me. I'm going to feed you, you feed me. And then in hell, they're going, I'm not going to feed you. Why should I feed you? I'm not eating, so you shouldn't eat either. So it's the psychology of it, right? The value system of it.
Yeah.
So if you look at our Earth today, maybe that's an analogy for us today. Maybe
Hmm.
there is plenty here. Maybe we have an abundance of what we need here, but it's our psychology of how we see that. Do we see it as all scarcity, or do we see it as abundance to be shared, you know?
That's right. How we use it, how we, with 7 billion up going up to possibly 9 billion people, we can survive on this planet. It's not too
Yeah.
many people. It's too many people for our current set of values and our current
Right,
idea,
right,
the current
right.
narrative, and we feel like we need to get stuck to a
Yeah,
particular narrative. So
yeah,
we've
yeah,
covered a lot of things that about what direction we could go
yeah.
uh, and why we're not going in that direction. But I want to ask you, what are those? What are the characteristics of the good life, if the or of well-being or living well? If it's not just simply having a good job and it's not just simply materially focused,
Hmm.
what are some of those characteristics associated with living well?
Okay, so at the top of it was that relationship, right?
Hmm.
How do we relate to other people? What
What
is
does
our
that look like?
what
Yeah.
does it look like?
Hmm.
Yeah, which is it's a tough one. I mean, it sounds easy, but it's not. Right? It's probably the most challenging thing we face, right? Just even within families, right? Um, how do we relate to our parents, our children? I've been part of a class on parent care, and it's you know, this psychologist realized that, wow, to assist teenagers, we have to get the parents regulated first, because the parents not being regulated creates teens that are not regulated, kids that are not regulated, right? And then we just perpetuate the process. So having that relationship piece and working on that every day is one of our biggest challenges.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
can you say a little bit more about, from your perspective,
Yeah.
uh, what does that actually look like? What are the qualities, the
Okay.
characteristics of a good relationship? Or
So that's a big one. Um, we talk about unconditional love, but that's a tough one, right? How do we love unconditionally? We talk about compassion. How do we truly have compassion towards our own family members and our own friends, right? How do we show that compassion within our community? Um, I think it's how do we practice loving care, loving kindness, you know? Um, how do we practice the virtues, and this comes up with the virtues because part of that self realization, self awareness is how much am I in survival mode and how much am I accessing my character strengths and virtues. And so only by practicing the virtues and strengthening that part of us, which is challenging, it's like a muscle, right? It's a spirit muscle. Um, Only by practicing it, practicing service, can we actually begin to develop, loving care and kindness. Loving care and kindness is not easy. Being selfish is much easier, and so caring for others is more difficult and more challenging than not caring. But it's more rewarding if you can grasp it and start to practice it, right? So I think in daily life, it's starting with that. How do I relate to my family? How do I relate to my neighbors? Am I connected to my neighbors? And how am I related to community? Do I have community? Right. And today, remember, isolation is one of the biggest issues, challenges we're facing right now. And it's become a health concern, right?
mm-hmm.
Because people are feeling isolated, and that in turn is causing chronic illness. So I think going back to what makes good relationship, yeah, you have to access those virtues and character strengths, right? It's kind of something that pushes you beyond the survival needs and takes you to that space where you are concerned of others and the needs of others, not just your own needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that's a whole program of personal strengthening and practice that again we're not necessarily educated to, and we kind of have to figure it out, muddle through, and find out on our own. But I think we do need some kind of structured, process where we're working on those character strengths. How do we work on our character strengths? How do we work on gaining the virtues? You know,
Mm-hmm.
because ultimately, I think right now, our only school of life is that trial and error,
Hmm.
pain, suffering, loss. We're kind of learning, muddling through it the hard way right now.
Yeah. I love how you're essentially saying, so I'm trying to target you with a question like, what is it? What are those characters? I love how you're suggesting that it is a process and it's something that we have to discover through trial and error, but through engagement. Like you're
Hmm.
saying, compassion, what is that? That's hard.
Yeah.
Love, what is it? That's hard. It's not just this one thing. You didn't give it just, love means if you do this, uh, and I do that, then we love each other. No, it's
Yeah.
not that simple. It's something that is in process, moment to moment, throughout our interactions. And in order for us to actually be loving towards one another and compassionate and all these other positive virtues, uh, we have to be actively engaging it,
Yeah.
actively asking the question about it, pursuing it, clarifying it in our own minds and in our the intermind, or
Yeah.
that mind in between us, and through
Hmm.
conversation and dialogue. What is it good? What does it to
Yeah.
mean to be loving? Because
Yeah.
good suggests that there has to be other. It's not just
Hmm.
me.
Hmm.
Good suggests that to live good, to live well, to live ethically, morally, virtuously, the others are involved. And what does that look like? And there isn't a simple answer. And the purpose of us having this conversation in this podcast is to suggest that it's not a simple answer. But just because it's not a simple answer, that doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue it.
Yeah.
We should I okay, for lack of a better word, should.
Hmm.
Oh, it behooves us to continuously pursue this idea, this notion
Yeah.
of good, loving, compassion, kindness, all of these positive qualities day to day. And sorry, folks, I don't have a simple answer for you.
Right.
The answer is pursue it.
Yeah.
Listen to others. Tune into
Yeah.
this podcast.
Yeah. Well, and,
Have conversations with others.
right. And some of the people that I have found most loving, most compassionate are the people who have suffered some of the greatest pain
Yeah.
in the world, but it's somehow that their capacity to overcome that pain became their resilience, became their powerful love.
Mm-hmm.
And in each case I would think, oh my gosh, I would never survive that. Oh, I couldn't, I don't know, I don't think I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But their example gives me strength and kind of inspires me to think, okay, I can do it. I mean, if they could do it, I can do it. And then by seeing those examples, I mean, um, people, like Nelson Mandela, people who have gone through great suffering, but still come out compassionate, not thinking revenge or not thinking, you know, um, totally able to forgive the enemy or totally able to turn the other cheek. Um, that's tough. It's not easy. But if we turn to some of the examples that we have as historical figures or people in our lives, a grandmother, um, somebody who showed you that deep love, and if we can continue to be inspired by that or the strength and resilience of someone else, I think those are beautiful moments, and those are the moments that trump everything else and make you feel that oxytocin, not the
Yeah.
cortisol.
Exactly. The love hormone, huh? The
Yeah.
the bonding hormone. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. This is great. I
Um,
think, yeah, I agree with you about a lot of what you're saying. That, yeah, this is all a process, and the suffering, the challenges that we have can enable us, if we can overcome those, it can
yeah.
enable us to tap into something greater and more beautiful,
Which is
because we
kind
have
of
to.
right. And I think that, oh, I forgot to mention, I mean, one of the most significant books I've ever read in my life is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I mean,
Yeah.
that's almost cliche, but but I thought it was, I mean, when I read it, it was, I thought I discovered this amazing book, but for him to distill it down to human choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you can choose love over hate, that's huge. And being
Yeah.
loved by somebody and loving them back is kind of natural, But when you can overcome and choose to love in a moment where you're challenged to do either, that's huge, really
Huge.
huge. Um, and I thought, his pointing to, if we were stripped of everything, what are we left with? It's our
Yeah.
choice. And then to think that each day you make over 35,000 choices in a lifetime. If you live to be 80, you're going to make over 1 billion choices,
Yeah.
you know, and the collection of those choices make up who you are.
Exactly.
That's pretty powerful, right?
Yeah. Where we choose to place our attention,
Right.
and we have some freedom, some capacity to do that. And where I place my attention now,
Yeah.
that's going to have a causative effect on where I place my attention tomorrow.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and so we have that, we can do that.
Yeah.
And by placing our attention on something, let that natural will that is in the universe, agency,
Yeah.
that prana from the Hindu perspective,
Mm-hmm.
Indian perspective, yogic perspective, that
Mm-hmm.
energy that is pushing us, driving us, that's there.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can harness that energy, because it's, that agency that we have. We're exemplifying that agency by having this conversation, but
Yeah.
we can channel that agency by where we place our attention.
Yeah.
Where,
Yeah.
how are we placing it? I know I keep saying it, but it's so, so, so important. If I can
Yeah.
place my attention and then and apply my agency, my capacity to use this universal agency that's in
Mm-hmm.
the universe,
Mm-hmm.
channel that agency in a particular direction, and that's our intention.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can intend to transform ourselves, starting with what you said earlier, self-awareness, and then from that space of self-awareness, how am I thinking about myself, and how am I thinking about the world, how am I thinking about others, and then asking ourselves, can I change it? Can I
Yeah.
transform my situation? Can I choose to place my attention in a direction that's going to allow my life to be better?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so important to have children, or young adults be aware that you do have the choice, right? I think a lot of times we don't necessarily even think we have a choice.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting, we can stay in this reactive state. If we just stick to the emotions, the survival piece, we're all constantly in a reactive state, survival, reactive. But then to go over the threshold and move to active agency, now we have to make a choice. Now we have to observe our behavior, and now we have to choose growth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the crux of the challenge that we face, right? Is how much am I just going to drift through life just being reactive, comforting myself, or am I going to actively become an agent, you know, choose the direction that I want to go in, choose what it is, what does it mean to have, lived well. So, that's such a big piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. We're coming to a close, and just wanted to, I know we can just continue to talk about this. There were
Yeah,
so
you
many
and I can.
questions. I know. I wanted to ask you more questions about your Japanese heritage and how that has influenced your thinking, your current
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And I know, if you don't mind sharing, I know
Yeah.
that you are uh, of the Baha'i faith, or you,
Mm-hmm.
how do you say that? You're
Baha'i
practicing,
faith. Yeah. Baha'i
just of the
faith.
Baha'i faith?
Yeah.
Okay. Faith. You, can you share a little bit about that and what influence and impact that has on you? And then in general, I know we mentioned a little bit about
Yeah.
religious traditions, but how does that institution inform
Mm-hmm.
you, and why do you think institutions are important?
Okay. It's interesting because I think the biggest the biggest influence that it's had, I mean, first of all, if religion is going to be compelling to me, it had to be sort of mind blowing. And I think each spirituality teaching does have mind blowing aspects to it. But in the Baha'i faith, one of the key, it's interesting because the Harvard study came up with relationship as being, the key to living well. So in the Baha'i faith, it's one of the core tenets, one of the key tenets is the oneness of religion, the oneness of humanity, oneness of God. In other words, in totality, we are all in the same fishbowl. We are part of one, universe. We're just one collective system. So it kind of goes back to it. It all gets reflected in sort of how I see the world, how I want to be in the world. So this notion of unity of things and this notion of collectively moving forward for the better for all. And that the notion that religion is relative to the time that they've appeared, but in essence, that it's all coming from one universal collective consciousness. So its purpose is to compel human beings, I'm not supposed to say man, human beings to collectively sort of advance forward and grow towards a higher state of being. So, in each, oh my goodness, in Hinduism, you can find these brilliant nuggets of inspiration. In Buddhism, there are these brilliant. So in each religion, there are these spiritual teachings that are like gems that can be picked up. And in essence, it's saying that they're universal. And the only parts that have conflict are the parts that human beings kind of stuck on there, and institutionalized. So we just have to kind of recognize it for what it is. I mean, science has the same things, right? Science has its biases, and science evolves too. Spirituality evolves, and science evolves. So we're part of this collective evolution. That's probably how it most informs me.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask that question before we leave, but for the very reason that you just offered, that there are various institutions out there, and I look at them as stories, metaphors. No one has it 100% correct because we're human beings, and we've been processing information in this way. Let's say max 50,000 years, if that long. And to think that we have a grasp on the universe completely 100% is just bonkers.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people out there who think that. And I want to, again, there's a lot of issues with religious traditions for sure.
Yeah.
And there's lots of issues with the scientific tradition. People don't want to admit it, but it is. And we can still gain insights from these various different metaphors.
Yeah.
We don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's lots of good in science. There's lots of material science. Because when we say science, what we're generally referring to is material science. There's lots of good in religious institutions. Yes, there's lots of craziness and lots of things that need to be updated.
Yeah.
But there's lots of things in science that needs to be updated. Its metaphysical assumption needs to be updated. And there are people pushing for it. Just like the metaphysical assumptions in various religious spiritual traditions need to be updated to the current times. But you can still keep the jewels, the things that has inspired human beings to live a good life.
Yeah. They're like OS systems, right? They're operating systems. They're maps that constantly get updated, upgraded,
Updated and being upgraded is a good thing, folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what again, I keep saying about this podcast is to inspire us to update our own narratives about the world and about what it means to live well. That's what I aim to do in my conversations with brilliant people like yourself, so that I can be a better person and take these different perspectives and take the audience along with me in my journey towards being a better human being.
I love it. We're all on this journey, right?
Yeah. We need each other's help. I need your help. I need everybody's help. I'm
Totally.
I'm a
Totally.
fallible, imperfect human being trying to my best to do good.
I
Um,
hear you. I totally hear you.
so before we leave, is there any last thing you would like to leave the audience?
Oh gosh.
Final words.
Yeah, if you have the opportunity, I like to call we call it joy. My sister and I have joy in your life, and JOI is also the acronym for Journey of Insight. So keep exploring what's there in your heart, and I really do believe that it can be a beautiful and exciting and wonderful journey. This
Thank you.
life.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Etch. It's been wonderful to have this conversation with you, enlightening and thought provoking, inspiring, and yeah, let's keep this conversation going
I
and
love
and
it.
and looking forward to the next one.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Broderick. This has been just, it's always great to speak to you. I love it.
For sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.